The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the guest's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of AIHA. AIHA does not endorse any guest or the entity that they represent. On this episode of Healthier Workplaces, Navigating Workplace Risks, the Art of Accurate Exposure Judgment. Welcome to another episode of Healthier Workplaces. I'm Bob Krell, founder and publisher of Healthy Indoors Media, and your host for this program from AIHA. Stay with us.
Here's our consultant, Sarah. She's always looking for ways to grow her network and increase her business. But advertising is expensive. There are lots of competitors, and sometimes she has trouble finding the right audience. Luckily for Sarah, the American Industrial Hygiene Association, AIHA, offers the perfect low-cost solution, the AIHA Consultants Listing. This listing is the perfect resource for consumers and businesses, and especially for those in need of highly specialized and qualified industrial hygienists. Every year, AIHA sends the Consultants Listing to thousands of decision makers nationwide in a variety of industries, including legal, real estate, trade associations, academics, hospitals, and all levels of government, including most federal agencies. It's also readily available online through their website. Sarah had no idea the Consultants Listing was such a valuable low-cost resource. Now she knows getting into the directory makes perfect sense to better her business. It didn't take long before Sarah found her network expanding, and she was even pulling ahead of her competitors. The AIHA Consultants Listing, your link to building a larger network.
Welcome to Healthier Workplaces Show. Today's topic is exposure assessments in the workplace. I'm happy to be joined by Steve and Jan and Billy Bullock. Steve's going to take the lead on this, but tell us a little bit about your involvement in this aspect of
Happy to
health
do
and
it,
safety.
Bob. So I have been a certified industrial hygienist going on almost 39 years. And my journey started about 15 years ago. And I went to the American Industrial Hygiene Association and said, I need some help on framing an exposure assessment program. And that started a journey of me participating in officer rotations, development of professional development course content, delivery of that content. And now I am part of an improving exposure judgments advisory group that AIHA has commissioned to help improve the manner of delivery of an exposure assessment program into the workplace. And that's where I met Billy. Billy and I co-edited the current edition of the AIHA publication titled A Strategy for Assessing and Managing Occupational Exposures. And so Billy has implemented it, and we thought as part of the Improving Exposure Judgment Group that this type of interview format would be helpful to get other people primed on how they might take the same kind of journey and be successful in implementing a program.
Excellent. Billy, tell us about yourself.
Well, similar to Steve, I've got 38 years in experience. I'm a certified industrial hygienist and certified safety professional. I've worked in pulp and paper and allied chemicals for about 18 years and followed that up with 15 years with freight railroad. I also have or hold several adjunct appointments, one at Tulane University and the other University of West Florida, where I teach graduate courses in principles of industrial hygiene and environmental toxicology. I started with the AIHA Exposure Assessment Strategies Committee way back in 1999. And as Steve mentioned, we've worked on a number of PDCs together, and then the AIHA publication, the 4th edition.
Bob, thanks for the opportunity for the introduction. So, Billy, you and I are going to have a chat in trying to lay out for people how they might launch a good exposure assessment. And as you're well aware, that comes with the performance of a professional making a judgment. So let's start there. What is an exposure judgment, and why is it important to the context of workplace safety?
Well, Steve, I think exposure judgment is at the core of what IHOHS professionals do. It's an estimation of potential risks for workers, exposure to different environmental agents. Um, as an example, the potential risk is either acceptable, unacceptable, or uncertain. And it's very important because workers are exposed to environmental agents on a daily basis, and we cannot use, traditional industrial hygiene methods for workplace exposure assessments, going out and collecting samples, for each of these environmental agents. And we have to rely on our knowledge, skills, and training to make these judgments for both, workers and community citizens that are exposed on a daily basis.
Very good. So, how does an accurate exposure judgment contribute to the overall well-being of workers and the effectiveness of safety measures?
All right. Repeat that for me.
That's all right.
Start over. That was a long question.
It is. How does accurate exposure judgment contribute to the overall well-being of workers and the effectiveness of implementing a control program?
Well, it's critical to make accurate exposure judgments because our workers rely on us to protect them, protect their health and their well-being. We also need to ensure that we're making correct decisions about the controls that we put in place. So our exposure judgment is a key there.
Have you got any examples, Billy, in your career where you know that exposure judgments weren't done well and the consequences they brought to the health of the individual, to the company and the program and its standing with the workforce?
Well, I can think of a few examples. Workers throughout time, as they're exposed, they have a perception of whether their exposure is heavy or not heavy. But I've seen professionals come in and get real alarmed about a potential exposure that really might not be much ado about anything, and
right.
The professional can lose credibility there. And similarly, if a professional goes in and they, their professional judgment may be biased low, and the workers, think their exposure potential is higher, then to me, it's all about credibility. Same thing with management. As we go out and we're doing assessments and we're determining what we need to go back and collect further information on, doing more traditional monitoring with directory instruments or laboratory samples. What we select as the IHOEHS professional based on our judgment is a key. And if we make poor judgments and we spend a lot of money that the company's allocating unwisely, then management can be upset or take exception to how we performed. So it's a two-way street. We really need to be good at what we're doing, good at assessing initial assessment, where we're using our professional judgment to determine whether it's acceptable or unacceptable exposure for both worker credibility and management credibility.
Right. And I'd reinforce that just from my own experience. I've had the same kind of responses. I think under protecting our workforce is as bad as over protecting them. And either way, you're probably committing resources that management would want applied elsewhere. And I think that's a critical nature of why we want to see the performance of our profession improve in the accuracy of judgments. So let me move on to another question here on the list. The difficulty we have as hygienists is that we're overwhelmed with the things that our management wants us to be engaged in. They want us to look at new chemical purchases. They want us to investigate air quality issues. How did you find success in your career in integrating the need for a quality of effort in the exposure assessment judgments program to get the right balance? How were you able to go and make the case to management? We need to do this well. Was it framed against the wasting of resources by overprotecting, or the litigation that may come through underprotecting, or both?
Well, Steve, you mentioned that to start with, the new chemical approval process, and that's where I started years ago and had a fair amount of success, was integrating exposure assessment into the new chemical review process. And I think because of both, OSHA regulations and EPA regulations, companies understand that they can't just bring a chemical in without doing some sort of review. And the companies I worked for had a pretty robust process where they looked at a chemical, they sent the safety data sheet, the requester had to list how they were going to use the chemical, what it was going to be used for, what the quantity was. And I looked at that process and said, hey, we can include a lot of the company's questions that we use on our qualitative exposure assessment process, where we looked at, how a material was going to be used, use time, use frequency, duration, the quantity of materials. And when we built that in, whoever in the production department that was requesting the chemical would fill that out. So that when it came to the AIHA department to look at it, we had basically the determinants of exposure that we asked our field industrial hygienists to collect when they go out and observe a task to do a qualitative assessment. We were getting that up front. What that did for me in the department was we got more people in the company understanding the importance of exposure assessment. And we had been doing our qualitative exposure assessment probably for 5 or 10 years, separate from the new chemical review process. But when we integrated it, they got a better understanding of what we were doing, why we were doing it, why we're asking these questions, and how those, what we call determinants of exposure, affect potential risk. And sometimes, I had the production superintendent, or maybe it was a chemical engineer that was, changing a process or adding a new raw material, come to me after they looked at the safety data sheet and was, putting in the information in this approval form that was exposure related, and say, hey, I don't know if this is the best material to be bringing in, because, I see it's got silica in it, or, chemical X in it. And, is that going to be a problem? So I had them coming to me and the IH team, where previously they just didn't even think about those elements. And, then it gave me an opportunity to share with them, what exposure assessment was and how we utilize it to, evaluate potential risk and then select appropriate controls for the workplace.
I had similar experience here at my installation, where when I first got there, we were catching a tail end of a decision train that was coming down the tracks. There'd been investment in specifying a product or engineering a system. And when it got to us, our eyes got big, and it was, why are you introducing this carcinogen? So we were trying to emulate the same thing you had success with, and we did it pretty well, and ultimately moved our exposure assessment needs for initial data into our chemical request program, just the same experience. So as far as, I don't know, it sounds like there was a lot of push on your part before the pull came from those people you engaged, who years later said, now I have an appreciation why I shouldn't buy X product or introduce this kind of hazard. Are there any other tools or methods you can share with our audience on how you successfully promoted the utility of exposure judgments and the importance of them being made well?
Yeah, so I think that was the first kind of introduction to a larger audience of company officials, and to go broader than that. Now that we have applications that can go on tablets and smartphones and that kind of stuff, is we were able to kind of expand that and engage the workers, the line workers, in doing some exposure assessments. We first started in the ergonomic side of the house. So we had a little application that was built so somebody could do a self-evaluation of workstation and come up with a potential risk factor. And now, that's been expanded, I think, into a number of areas. Fortunately, some of the good stuff from NIOSH programs like ladder safety risk, the application for ladders and heat stress, and the railroad that I worked for used a big nationally known health and safety software program that really is going to be expanding that capability much more. We have a lot of field workers, especially on our maintenance of wayside, the group that goes out and maintains the track infrastructure. They're like construction, or they are construction workers, and their workplace changes daily depending on what mile of track out of 23,000 miles of track that they're working on. And we've got a risk assessment tool that is, I think it probably maybe 5 or 6 years now, it has been implemented, and it includes traditional safety risk, slip, trips, and fall hazards, digging, fall protection. But we will be adding, and I see even as we go in the future, more elements on the occupational health side, based on visible emissions, like are the dust control systems working on the track equipment, noise, are we protecting ourselves from noise, how close we are to running equipment, and that kind of stuff. So I really think the expansion of what started as simple risk factors being captured on a new chemical approval sheet to a broader base, including in some of these applications where workers can do a self risk assessment of a situation, as part of their pre-safety checklist.
Very good. Billy, you're well aware, but again, for our audience, when we came up as younger hygienists, we made decisions because there was an expectation we were the experts, and that came through schooling, degree, and certification to a certain extent. But you're aware, as I am, that it's been noted that the accuracy of our judgments in the past is often poor or biased low. Can you speak to some of the factors, and I know you're aware of these by way of PDC delivery and other things, but what are some of the factors that lead professionals to make non-conservative, potentially not sufficiently protective decisions with respect to exposures?
Yes, Steve. I think some of the factors that are prominent are, the level of education. I think experience is critical. How much we've been out in a particular industry or particular workplace and done assessments. I've seen, probably, I know the research that was done and the data that we're working off here at AIHA, shows that a lot of the exposure judgments are biased low. I I think it depends on a person's, training and background. I've seen quite a few professionals that exposure assessments biased high. They, I think it's based on, like I said, very conservative. We a lot of us, and again, coming on from our background, were we in an industry, or have we gone out where exposures were very obvious and very high, or are we typically going out to well-established workplace that has good housekeeping program, and that can, I think, kind of mask or hide some of the potential exposures. But I think that the real key to making a good exposure is calibrating ourselves. And I know early on when I was teaching the PDCs here at AIHA, I would talk about my work in the paper industry, going into like a corrugated box plant, with equipment running at 600 feet per minute, and very loud. But within probably 6 to 8 months of my being employed in the paper industry, going out doing sound level surveys, I calibrated my ears. I could get within 1 or 2 decibels, just on gut instinct, right? I mean, that's a calibration, and I think
Right.
that is what we're seeing is a key in all the good work that the AIHA committee and people like Perry Logan and John Mulhausen, Ram Ramachandran, Susan Arnold. I can't name everybody, but the calibrating our professional judgment by the same way. I mean, when I was out in the shops and I had the sound level meter in my hand, and I'm looking at the number, I'm calibrating myself. So how do we do that for other things, other environmental agents, and using scenarios where we know what the monitoring results are? We've gone out, we've collected, hard data, and sharing that data with our in-house team of industrial hygienists in a way where providing the like a video of the task, and asking the group to rank the exposure using the AIHA exposure categories, based on their professional judgment. Where do you think the 95th percentile point estimate falls, and then giving them a little data, and then you see the data and you look at the statistics around that data, and statistics are super powerful. I mean, most of us don't have the luxury and didn't back when you and I started, having a lot of data. And I think that's, having the data, and you've got maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 samples, small data sets, and you look at the statistical analysis of it, and you apply Bayesian statistics, which is, probabilistic statistics, looking at the likelihood of where the true 95th percentile point estimate falls, is where we'll learn a lot. And that will help us make better judgments, because we're calibrating our professional judgment, and whether we've got heuristics that cause us to underestimate or overestimate. And I know the data shows that most of us are underestimating exposures based on statistical analysis of the data. That's how we will improve our judgment. But I think that you asked me, and maybe I answered it, but maybe I didn't. It's kind of a long answer. But some of the things that go in, I think, to our professional judgment, that we either can do good at or bad at, or based on our knowledge. Do we know and understand that particular workplace? Have we gone out and observed the tasks being performed? That gets to our training as well in a particular industry, and that, I think, if we've spent time in a workplace and we've collected samples in that workplace, we've analyzed them, we will be pretty good at making judgments in that particular industry. But then taking that to a completely different setting is going to establish some bias. Was that previous work site, did they have low exposures and we had monitoring data, and this one we're not so sure about? We've got to have a way to calibrate ourselves and to improve the judgments there. And it's all about looking at the process. If they have some data, taking that data, doing some statistical analysis around it to really allow us to look at the exposure profile, look at the central tendency of that profile, and the upper and lower tail, as compared to a published safe level. And that's how we become better at what we do.
I appreciate that answer, Billy. So in recapping, if we know that there are some reasons that prevent us from accurate judgments, and you mentioned our biases from our experience, if you've been to one dip tank operation and through your career you've seen hundreds of them, odds are pretty good, much like your calibrated ear in the paper mill, that experience helps you. And as long as the same context is what you witness in the next place you go to, your judgment's probably okay. The other thing, of course, is that we're not good in logarithmic thinking. We want to be linear thinkers. And so we have a real tough time looking at upper tolerance tests, upper tails of distributions, and recognizing that. So I want to pivot to, okay, if we recognize our problem and our frailties, what kind of things do we need to do to get support from the stakeholders that hold our resources and whom we're trying to protect? What kind of things should we be doing as good strategic approaches to our management team on the importance of improving our exposure judgments?
Well, I think the key is demonstrating value. So, we've spent a lot of time explaining selling ourselves, selling the profession to our management, and explaining to workers that, we're here to, protect their health, improve work conditions, and, hopefully leave them in a way where they have, a good quality of life in retirement. And, we all have to submit budgets, right, to get the resources we need to do our job. And I think, in my view, implementing the tools like the statistical tools, and a lot of them now are freely available on AIHA website. And AIHA's got models, mathematical models, and so does EPA. But I think that we can demonstrate that we can improve our judgment, by implementing these tools, and some of them are at no cost. But I think there's a little bit of danger in going to management who, I think we've said this in the PDCs, that our managements, most of them, don't really understand what we do, why we do it. They just know they need one of us, right, to help improve working conditions, make sure that they're meeting the standard of care, that we're providing a reasonably safe place for our employees to work. Some of it, I think you might have said, some legal liability. They know they need us for legal liability. But if we go, talking about, well, we don't make good judgments, they're paying us to make these judgments,
right?
And say we need these tools to, help us improve our judgments. I think we have to do it the right way. And I think the right way is, we're making all of these judgments, and we, our workers are exposed to chemicals every day. maybe, depending on the type of workplace, hundreds, maybe thousands of different chemicals. And we can't go out and monitor every employee every day for every chemical right now. Technology is advancing rapidly, and someday, and it may not be too far off, we might be able to do that, but we just don't have the luxury of monitoring every worker and every environmental agent. And the way to do that, I mean, we still have to make, and are making, whether we're consciously thinking about it or not, an exposure judgment every time we look at everything the worker does, and all those hundreds of chemicals. We're making an exposure judgment with zero samples collected. And the way to improve that, from our qualitative assessment, is to collect some samples on, percentage of the chemicals. But now we've got, some really nice mathematical modeling tools that are easy to use. We can run a model to help us improve our judgment, or to validate. If we rank something as being an acceptable exposure, and we haven't collected any samples, we can now go and use some of these tools that are available through AIHA and see what the exposure profile looks like when we run the numbers without going out and collecting some samples. And that, again, is a way to help calibrate and improve our judgment. But I think the way that we pitch it to management, and I've spent probably now 20 years on doing qualitative exposure assessments, qualitative exposure assessments in the workplace. And initially, it was a pretty big lift. It was labor intensive, required a lot of work, and we had to really convince our companies to allow us to put that effort in. But it was getting closer to that comprehensive exposure assessment that we all want to achieve, as opposed to going out and picking 5 or 6 things in this work area that we think have the highest potential exposure, and then going out and monitor them. And if now that we have these tools that will help us also improve our professional judgment, like the mathematical, doing some statistical analysis on a small data set, doing some modeling where there is no data or maybe very little data, is improving our overall industrial hygiene program, and at the same time helping us with our professional judgment. So we're getting some benefit there personally, but we're also doing it in a way that it's not really costing the company more, but it provides some validation. And I think that's a good word, a validation to the previous work we did from a qualitative standpoint, as well as our exposure judgments that we made on, the vast majority of the process has acceptable exposure. And, we've got these 5 chemicals or 5 environmental agents that we're going to go out and collect additional data on. Did we pick the right 5? And what about the hundreds of other ones that weren't selected? All this is a way, I think, to both demonstrate to management and the workforce that we're doing a more scientifically valid approach to our exposure assessment, and we're validating our exposure judgment by using these statistical tools and mathematical models. And the end result is, the accuracy of our program is enhanced, and we feel strongly that we're selecting the right environmental agents to control, and that we've gone out and validated that those controls are actually achieving the level of exposure reduction that they're designed to.
Very good. So one of the things that I heard you just step through in the response was the fact that early on you recognized there was a finite amount of resource to deploy for an infinite need, so many people wanting your time, so many different places you could start. What I didn't hear you mention so far is training. And I want you to spend a minute, if you would, Billy, the nature of knowing that those early judgments qualitatively, it only comes after so much time and so much experience in your career and 20 years with your company, when you're now afforded, maybe we've collected sufficient sets of data. So if you were a new person who is coming, and maybe you don't have the luxury of a corporate enterprise behind you that's got, they're asking you for $1 million budget. What are some of the things, these tools, when you hand someone a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And you don't want that to be the impression for the variety of tools that AIHA has assembled at our apps and tools web link. Speak for a minute about the manner of pursuing training and calibration. I think you used the term validation in the tool so that you know that you're making good judgments. Is that something that you've got experience with before you left the railroad that you could speak to? And otherwise, I know that you have some history with the delivery of education sessions and PDCs.
Yeah, Steve, I think, training is very important. And, when I was a part of implementing that first qualitative exposure assessment process, we learned that even if you have, well-developed form and process, and you put that out to, varying field industrial hygienists that, fresh out of school up to even experienced, the variation in the data coming back can be pretty high. And I think it all comes down to training. So we recognized the importance of training early on. And that's really what led me to seek out the AIHA Exposure Assessment Strategies Committee when I did, similar to your experience. You had a need, so you went out to look for a way to fill it. And I became engaged with the group, and the professional development courses, were very, very good, very well put together for the members. And what we came back and did, was when we put together a process like that qualitative exposure assessment process is have a training component to that so that we could improve the consistency. We had 170 different plants, and I don't know how many countries. The variability in whether you were going to get quality data back or not was pretty high. And I think as we implement the tools to help us improve our judgment, it's just as important that we all receive good training on how to use those tools, whether it's the AIHA stat spreadsheet or the BDA tool from Dr. Paul Hewitt. And how do you use it? How do you interpret the results? We don't get that kind of stuff necessarily in our degree training. We have biostatistics, and we generally understand statistics, but what are the specific parameters for these different tools? And the same way with the modeling. So if we want to have our staff improve and start using these tools, I think looking for the AIHA PDCs, the webinars that are available, the how to use these documents that are PDF format or all good. Taking that in-house and running that by your team, running your team through that training, and then exercise. We do a lot. You and I both have a background in emergency response, so we understand the importance of exercising the plan. And it's no different in professional judgment. I think that doing a process like was laid out in one of the JOEH articles that Perry Logan was a co-author on, that they used at his company, is very, very good. It's training, exercising,
Yep.
drilling. You have a qualitative exposure assessment drill where you put a video of a process up, and then no matter how many people you have in the room, you all evaluate it, you rank it, and then you share some data, and then you use the tools. You take that data and you put it through the tools, the AIHA stat spreadsheet or the BDA tool, just like we do in the PDC. I mean, we're doing hands-on workshop. We're
Right.
showing them how to use it, and then we talk about what the results mean. So we're, leveraging the skill and training of all the AIHs on the team to do that. And you learn from that, and you can learn a lot. If you're a sole AIH and you're on your own, the AIHA webinars that cover this material, you can do it with a group online. And I think that, that's a key to training and educating yourself and improving your own professional judgment, calibrating yourself, like I mentioned, with the sound level meter.
Very good. We've been at it about 45 minutes in the course of our conversation today, Billy, and I appreciate everything you've done. Two last things that I'd want to speak about with you, and one would be, what do you see as the key improvements that are coming down the pike with respect to improving exposure judgments? And then if you'd close with any of your additional thoughts on what someone might do to help get organizational approval for the significant effort that might be necessary in a corporation if you're trying to promote training and exercising, as you just mentioned in your prior answer.
Yeah, I think what you and I've seen, over the last 15 years, from the only available, statistical package was tens of thousands of dollars, Monte Carlo, crystal ball, those kind of things, to tools that AIHA volunteers have put together to make them simplified into simple Excel spreadsheets, to have a Monte Carlo simulation available in an Excel tool. It is a game changer for all of us. And I think that the team, the volunteers at AIHA, are continuing to improve those tools, make them more simple to use, and they're so readily available. I think that's what we are looking forward to, and things that we can carry with us in the field on a tablet or some sort of smart device, where we can do a quick modeling of something while we're standing there looking at it. That's what I see as the future improvements of going out and doing a workplace exposure assessment. The other thing that's making leaps and bounds, is sensor technology. We're going to have more available sensors to us, like that sound level meter that I had. That was simple. I was carrying it. I got direct results. I was getting direct feedback on what I thought. My opinion was of how loud this was, and we'll have more availability of that for particulate matter. We've got tools that are available now, but are continuing to be improved on for like respirable crystalline silica, mini gas and vapors, with availability of PIDs and other tools. So that's kind of where I really see the future of improving exposure judgments. The work group right now is doing some great work. I think the key is identifying those elements that we don't do good judgments on, and coming up with ways and tools to improve that, is another thing. So, my takeaway or parting comment is, that group is out doing some great work. There's going to be, a lot of new products and services that will come out of that process that will help current practitioners and up and coming young professionals jumpstart their ability at professional judgment, and the tools that we'll have available to calibrate our own judgment in the field by more sensor technology and ease of on the fly modeling using a tablet or something are really going to be phenomenal.
Billy, I appreciate it. I would echo that. I know that Dr. Arnold is working to make an improvement to the industrial hygiene exposure scenario tool, and those improvements are probably going to be a logical feed into some of the heuristics like the structured deterministic model to do that, as you say, on the fly modeling. So those things are coming. The other thing through the Improving Exposure Judgments Advisory Group that we're pushing, because as you're aware, there's many different project initiatives. One of the big ones is trying to get something collaboratively for the exercises and practice of the use of the tools. If you have a big corporate background, you might have the backing of a training organization to help you with doing that. But if you don't, if you're the sole practitioner, you probably would like to lean on somebody who really understands this stuff, and they could put a video up of a scenario. You could have them make an initial judgment. You could ask them, here's some basic inputs to the exposure, go run a model, make another judgment. Here's a couple of samples we took in the last 12 months, make another judgment. We think that within the community of practice of the advisory group, we think that's a really critical thing that's coming online. So I appreciate that you took the time today for these interviews supporting AIHA, and hopefully our marketing team and our host here on the podcast, Bob, is going to be able to make good use of this content as we try to get everybody on board to improving exposure assessments and their judgments. Appreciate your time today.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for asking me. I think it's an exciting time for all of us on the project. And, just like I said, I think some really good things are going to come out of it that's going to help all of us in the OEHS profession.
So that's our show for this week. We'll be back again with another episode of Healthier Workplaces. Until next time, I'm Bob Krell. Stay healthy.